So we are going to see what is exactly the data import process to import data into our tables in ServiceNow. For our application, we are going to have two tables. The first one is going to be the meeting table. The second one is going to be the time zone table. The meeting table will have all the information related to the meeting, such as the host email, the start date time of the meeting, the ID, UID, and so on. And it will also contain a reference field which will refer to the time zone table. So now let's see all the technical part that we need to know before we import the data. Okay, so in ServiceNow we have a functionality called a data source. Okay, the data source, it will basically create a source of data, and we have several ways of doing it. So we can use an FTP connection, we can use integration hub, we can create a source with a script, we can use an Excel file sheet. In our case, we will use an Excel file sheet to load the data into our time zone table, and also a script to load the data into our meeting table. So let's see now how we do for the time zone table. The first part of it is to create a data source with an Excel file sheet. So it is actually going to create what we call a staging table. This is an intermediate table, okay, where you put first your data. Okay, what is important to notice at this point, the staging table itself, it's a child table for another table, which is an import set row table. Okay, when you load the data, and you will have an import set created. Okay, import set, it's a record created in our import set row table, and it will contain information such as how much time it took to load the data, what is the data source that we are using here, how many records that we processed, this kind of information. And the staging table, it will contain all the records. Okay, so if you have 10 records in your Excel file sheet, you will have 10 records in the staging table. So in our case, for the column, let's say time zone column, it will create a time zone field. But what is important to notice here as well is the time zone field will have U_time zone database name for that field. So this will help later for example, for the next process, which is transferring the data from one table to another table, and it is going to make easier. So let's see how now. So the functionality that we use here, that we use next, it's called transfer map. It will be responsible to transfer the data from the staging table to the target table. In our case, the target table is going to be the time zone table, and staging table is the table that we have created with the data source. Okay, so how what is needed here? So what we need is to tell to the system from which table you have to take the data, and you have to put to which field. Okay, so we have to tell, you will map the time zone field. So the time zone field that we have in the staging table should be mapped to the time zone field that we have in our target table. So if we have more columns, let's say we have ID, email, so we have to map it. So how we can do automatically is just by having a convention. So we already see that we have a U_time zone as the database name for our time zone field. So we will have just a rule saying, if you have U_time zone, map it to the time zone field that you have in your target table. If you have U_ID, map it to the ID field. If you have U_email, map it to the email field that you have in your target table. This is how we can do automatically map all the fields. In case you have a different name in your target table, you can map it manually. So all you do after is just create a transfer map, map all the fields, then you transfer the data. So why it is important to use a whole amount of process to put in data into your target, into your table? Simply because you want to make sure that the data is clean. If you want to have for example, a specific date format in your target table, and you have it differently in your staging table, you can write a script which is actually going to make that happen. Okay, so it's just to make sure that your data is clean when you put it in your target table. Okay, or clean, or you want it to have in a certain way. So this is what we use to import data for our time zone table. It's pretty much the same process that we are going to use for our meeting table, but instead of having an Excel file sheet, we will use a script. And we will also create some other things, like we have to use the schedule import functionality, or also do the integration, because we are pulling the data from an external application. Okay, but now what we are going to do is just to create the time zone table, load the data using the process that I have explained, and create the meeting table and design the form for the meeting table. That's all we do. So just try to relate everything that I have explained to what we are going to do after.